Caledonian's permit to work and isolation procedure is central to ensuring the safety of workers on site. The procedure is fairly detailed, so it is important that everyone affected by it takes the time required to understand it fully and comply with it. If everyone has a common understanding and complies with the procedure, this will greatly reduce the risk of an accident happening. Firstly, let's be clear when a permit to work is required. It is required for any observation work which takes place within a hazardous area, except where you are working under an SOP. This could include observing things within a confined space, a guarded enclosure, or at height. A permit is also needed for any mechanical or electrical maintenance work activity which goes beyond observation. This includes the repair, removal, adjustment, or installation of parts. The following documents are used at Caledonian to control hazardous work. This training session will concentrate on the master, hot work, and confined space permits, and the arrangements for isolation control. A master permit can be issued on its own, but a work at height, hot work, or confined space permit must always be issued in conjunction with a master permit. When work is to be done in a high voltage room, a master permit may only be issued whenever a valid high voltage permit is already in place. In the context of the permit to work procedure, responsible persons are area production supervisors, shift managers, and engineering supervisors. Authorised persons are those who have been given authority to isolate or de-isolate equipment. Job sponsors are those who are responsible for the planning and supervision of non-routine or project work. The master permit has 5 parts, A to E. Part A is a description of the work to be done and is completed carefully and fully by the person requesting the permit. This could be the job sponsor. Part B is the authorisation of the permit and must be completed by the responsible person. The potential hazards and safety precautions to be observed are stated here, and the appropriate personal protective equipment is specified. Part C must be signed on by each person working under the permit and signed off by each person when they have finished working under the permit. The act of signing on the permit confirms that the person has read, understood, and will comply with the conditions of the permit. Before a job is started, the board copy of the permit should be placed on the live permit board by the person who is signing on to the permit. The permit should be kept on this board until the job is complete or until a new permit is issued. The craftsman's copy must be taken to the job by the person or persons carrying out the work. The top or master copy should remain in the permit book. If other people need to sign on to the permit after the job has begun, they must obtain the craftsman's copy from the people working at the job and take this to the live permit board. They should then remove the live permit for the job and take this together with the craftsman's copy to the permit book and sign on all 3 copies. After this, they return the board copy to the live permit board and take the craftsman's copy back to the job. While the master copy of the permits should remain in the permit book, the craftsman and board copies should not be left in the books or on the tables while the job is in progress. When the work is completed, Part D of the permit should be completed by the last person from each trade discipline who signs off at Part C. This part informs the area operator and others whether or not the work is complete and whether or not the equipment can safely be taken back into service. Part D also enables the application of additional padlocks to ensure continued safety. This might be needed in some circumstances, for example where it would be unsafe to bring equipment back into service. The guiding principle is that people who have completed their work should not sign off their job and remove their personal padlock whilst leaving the equipment in a dangerous condition, in particular where it would be dangerous to restart the equipment. Later we will look in more detail at how to apply and remove padlocks, and also how to record this in Part D of the permit. However, in general, the last person for each trade to sign off at Part C must specify whether the equipment is available for use. In the case that the equipment is not available, this person must attach an orange or blue padlock to the lock-off box, orange for electrical and blue for mechanical. When the padlock is in place, complete the details on the yellow isolation control sheet and then attach a suitable tag to the padlock. Complete the tag to give the relevant details. The live board copy of the permit should then be moved to the Equipment Not Available section of the live permit board. Please remember that copies of permits should not be left inside the permit books or on the tables. They must either be returned to the live permit board or discarded as appropriate. Part E may be signed by the responsible person to cancel or close the permit. However, Part E does not need to be signed if Part D is already completed and it indicates that the equipment is available for use. At shift changeover, the incoming shift must be aware that there may be a number of live permits still ongoing. It is essential, therefore, that the shift management and other permit issuers check the nature of these existing live permits before issuing a new one in the area concerned. This is why it is so important that everyone follows the same rules and keeps the area tidy and the live board up to date. A person may be required to sign on to more than one permit at a time if required to work on other jobs. However, if this is needed, then personal padlocks must be in place for all live jobs. Additional personal padlocks must therefore be used when signing on to new permits with a requirement for isolation. The person in control of the permits should continually review the status of all permits on the live board. If required, permits may be removed from the live board by the responsible person and cancelled by completing Part E. Equipment cannot be taken back into service or restarted by operators until either Part D indicates that the equipment is available for use, or Part E indicates that the permit has been cancelled. In the case of jobs that run over several shifts, padlocks may be left in place by those working rather than removed at the end of each shift. But check with the permit issuer if this is possible for your job. The hot work permit is used to reduce the risks associated with hot work. However, it will only be effective in doing this if all those engaging with the permit focus on the hazards involved and ensure the relevant precautions are taken to avoid any incident. The permit process also defines accountability and responsibility. We have learned from past experience that the area at risk from the hot work often extends well beyond the site of the actual work. We have also learned that it can take several hours for a stray spark or hotspot to develop into a fire. Once we have an actual flame, the development and spread of a fire can be extremely rapid. This all means that we need to have the correct mindset when we engage in hot work, and we must rigorously follow the permit process. Hot work permits are always issued in conjunction with a master permit. Part A is completed by the person carrying out the hot work, and it describes the work to be done. The scope of the work must be understood by both the permit issuer and the persons carrying out the work. It is important that the person issuing the hot work permit is satisfied that the area has been suitably prepared beforehand. Combustible materials should be removed where possible. Residual risks may be controlled by the use of fire blankets and thoroughly wetting down the area. When checking and preparing an area for hot work, remember to consider anywhere sparks could fall. For example, areas and levels below the hot work, openings in structures where sparks may enter, or nearby air currents which could draw in sparks or burning material. Part B is the authorization of the permit. This is completed by the responsible person. It details the precautions and conditions to be observed, in addition to those laid out in the master permit. It is important that the names of the fire watchers are specified so that the responsibilities for fire watch are clear from the outset. A minimum post-work monitoring period should be agreed and specified where necessary. Generally, the minimum is 1 hour, but this very much depends on the circumstances. A fire watch briefing document is available, and this clarifies the requirements and expectations for fire watchers. In order to ensure the work area is adequately monitored following completion of the hot work, the responsible person nominates the UPM person who is best placed to monitor the area for fire immediately following completion of the hot work. When the responsible person nominates a UPM area fire watcher, they must then brief this person on the location and scope of the planned hot work, and on the expectations for post-work monitoring. The UPM area fire watcher has an important role in managing the fire risk. It is therefore important that we record the name of this person on the hot work permit, so that the responsibilities are clear from the outset. The UPM area fire watcher therefore completes Part C of the permit, and when they do this, they sign to accept the responsibility for post-work monitoring of the areas affected by the hot work. The active monitoring role only begins once the UPM area fire watcher is notified that the hot work is completed, or when they otherwise become aware that the hot work is complete. Any sources of heat, smouldering or flame must be wetted down and cooled. The area needs to be monitored for the agreed minimum time and until there is no further risk from fire. It is really important that any continuing fire watch requirements are transferred at the end of a shift to the incoming shift. UPM area fire watchers therefore need to ensure that the ongoing fire watch requirements are communicated clearly and the responsibility for fire watch is effectively transferred at the end of their shift. The UPM diary should be used to log details of any ongoing fire watch requirements. Part D of the hot work permit must be signed by all those who will be carrying out the hot work. When you sign on to this part of the permit, you must confirm that the conditions under which the permit has been issued have been read, understood, and that you will comply with these. Work may only continue while it is being done in accordance with the conditions set down in Part B. If the conditions change, stop the work and report the changes to the responsible person. Fire watch must be maintained for the duration of the job by the team completing the hot work. They must then inform the nominated UPM area fire watcher immediately on completion of the hot work. In the case where the UPM area fire watcher is not available at the end of the job, contact the shift manager. Do not leave the area until the responsibility for ongoing hot work monitoring has been transferred to either the UPM area fire watcher or the shift manager. Part E must be signed by the responsible person whenever it is safe to close and cancel the permit. Confined space permits are always issued in conjunction with a master permit. Part A requires a description of the planned work, to be detailed by the person in charge of the confined space job. Normally this is the job sponsor. A rescue plan must be in place for every confined space job. This plan can either be specified within Part A of the confined space permit or issued as a separate document in conjunction with the permit. In any case, the rescue plan must be suitable and sufficient, and it must be clearly communicated to the people involved. Part B is for the authorization of the permit. This is completed by the responsible person. It defines the conditions for entry to the confined space and the precautions to be observed, including PPE. This section is also used to record the atmosphere test results. Part C must be signed on by each person involved in the confined space job and signed off by each person when the work is completed. The act of signing on confirms that the person has read and understood the conditions under which the permit has been issued, and also that these conditions will be complied with. Part D must be completed by the last person who signs off at Part C. This part informs the responsible person whether or not the work is complete and whether or not the confined space or vessel can be taken back into service. Part E is signed by the responsible person to cancel the permit. Workers should actively be mindful while working under any permit to work. Workers should maintain an awareness of their environment and the risks associated with their work while the work progresses. This dynamic risk assessment approach will identify if the conditions under which the permit was issued have changed significantly, or if additional risks have become apparent due to the nature of the work or deviations from the original work plan. Where any additional precautions are considered necessary, such as requiring safe access or additional isolations, the job should be stopped and all workers withdrawn while the initial permit to work is cancelled and a new one is issued. CDM sites are sometimes defined for large construction, demolition or machine upgrade projects. When we create a CDM site, this sits as a separate entity within the overall site. The control of permits for CDM sites is often different and is defined in the CDM safety plan. Permits for CDM related work are generally issued to supervisors and not the individual workers. The reason is to ensure there is clear instruction and communication between the supervisor and the permit issuer. There are often language barriers that would make it inappropriate for some individuals to sign onto a Caledonian permit. The CDM project permit procedure makes it clear that the contractor's supervisor has responsibility for ensuring his workers are fully briefed on the permit conditions as well as the risks and methods of working. CDM project permits will only be issued when the permit issuer is satisfied that the risk assessments and method statements are acceptable and that the work is required and ready to proceed. The isolation procedure at Caledonian is central to ensuring the safety of all employees and contractors. This controls the risk of injury due to equipment inadvertently starting or an uncontrolled release of energy. Isolations may be carried out to protect from electricity, hydraulics, steam, compressed air, radiation, physical effort, or fluids flowing, especially where the fluids have high pressure, high temperature, high flow rate, or where the material contains a hazardous substance. Proper isolation of equipment is achieved by applying an appropriate isolation and securing this with a controlled padlock. Whenever the isolations have been carried out, the person that applied them should prove them whenever possible, for example by attempting to jog or start the equipment. They should then sign and date the isolation control sheet. Local electrical isolations may be carried out at the request of the permit issuer by any person who understands what is required and is considered competent. In the case of electrical isolations other than local ones, the engineering department has defined authorization working levels for the following groups: senior authorized persons for working on high voltage, authorized persons for other than high voltage, and competent persons. A permit to work may only be issued after all the appropriate isolations have been carried out, unless the specific individuals are working within their specified authorization level. The permit issuer will determine whether isolations are to be controlled through a lock-off box or whether local isolation is appropriate. In the case where there are multiple local isolations, or a combination of local and MCC isolations, a lock-off box must always be used. Equipment should be identified both by its common name and its SAP functional location number where possible. Unless Caledonian has given specific written authorization, contractors must have equipment isolated by a Caledonian authorized person, and a lock-off box then used. If there is uncertainty over any isolation, the person concerned must raise the issue immediately with the responsible person. In some cases, equipment will have prescribed isolations detailed within the isolations part of Quality First. When this is available, it should be used to generate printed isolation control sheets. In any case, the required isolations must be confirmed by the responsible person issuing the permit. Isolations are verified according to the following hierarchy. Where possible, the points isolated should be checked and verified by the permit issuer. Where this is not practical, the responsible person should look for confirmation that the equipment has been isolated by confirming the equipment status on the process control screens and equipment. Where this is not practical, the responsible person should confirm that the equipment has been isolated by asking the authorized persons to confirm the applied isolations. Where there was an available means of jogging or otherwise proving the isolation, the responsible person, i.e. the permit issuer, should confirm that this has been done. Where this is not practical, the responsible person should ensure that the correct isolations have been specified and authorized as defined in the yellow isolation control sheet. Where local isolations are required, the details of these should be specified on the relevant permit to work. It is important that all local isolations are carried out before the permit is issued. This is likely to mean liaising with the area operators to apply the required local isolations before requesting the permit to work. Personal padlocks should be applied at the point of isolation or lock-off box by all those working. The personal padlock protects you while you work by ensuring that no one can energize the equipment. You should only remove your personal padlock whenever the task is complete. Where more than one person is working, it is important that each individual applies their own padlock. A multi-clasp lock-off system allows a number of padlocks to be applied and should be used where there are a number of workers. Where a lock-off box has been used to control the isolation, each person applying their personal padlock must sign on to the isolation control sheet before starting work. On completion of the work, you must sign off the same sheet and remove your personal padlock at that time. Padlock serial numbers must also be recorded. The isolation procedure generally requires that work may only proceed on equipment that remains isolated. However, the procedure makes provision for handling a special case where the planned work requires the removal of isolations on a temporary basis. For example, this might be done to allow for the jogging of pumps or motors for positioning or alignment purposes. This must only ever be done if there are specific instructions given within the permit to do this. In these cases, a specific Caledonian employee is nominated to manage the particular local isolations required. Only the person named and specifically instructed on the permit to work form is authorised to manage the de-isolation and re-isolation of equipment. The employee authorised to take control of the isolations has a very important safety role. They must firstly ensure that each individual working on the job applies a personal padlock at each point of isolation. Where a group of people are working on a job, a multi-clasp device should be used to accommodate multiple padlocks. Equipment should remain isolated as far as possible. Whenever it is necessary to de-isolate, the person managing the isolation process must request the removal of individual padlocks and then ensure that access to the hazardous area is prevented until the padlocks have been reapplied. Master production padlocks are used to give an additional level of control when isolating equipment. The supervisor or manager authorising the permit ensures the application and removal of the master production padlocks. These should normally be the first padlock applied to a lock-off box and the last one to be removed. A master padlock control box is used to hold the keys for all master production padlocks. It is kept locked at all times. Keys for this box will be kept by the area production supervisors and shift managers. There are some situations where temporary de-isolation of equipment is necessary. For example, a hydraulic actuator may need to be moved to allow the work to continue. This must always be done in a controlled manner and carefully coordinated by a responsible person. The responsible person who is taking charge of the de-isolation must give clear instructions to those involved. If you remove your personal padlock, you must not continue working until the relevant isolations are in place again and your personal padlock is reattached. Personal padlocks must never be removed by anyone other than the person they were issued to. Whenever it is considered necessary to highlight the status of equipment under maintenance, for example during fault finding or testing, specific warning notices or tags should be used to alert other people. Always use these warning tags on mobile equipment and cranes. Display them at the point of isolation or in a prominent part of the equipment which is under maintenance. Their purpose is to warn anyone approaching the equipment that it is under maintenance control and must not be used or interfered with. Take care to remove your personal padlock before leaving site, otherwise you may be asked to come back and remove it. In some circumstances, shift managers will cut off padlocks. If you have been advised that your padlock was cut off, you must discuss this issue with your shift manager and if appropriate apply a new padlock. If you are an engineering tradesman or supervisor and you have been given a permit for work on equipment that had already been isolated and the lock-off box is secured by either an orange or blue padlock, you will need to consider whether these padlocks can be removed at the time you finish your job. The reason that the orange and blue padlocks are used is to ensure continuity of isolation between various stages of the work. This means the isolation remains secure even after personal padlocks are removed. If you believe the equipment can now be returned to service, please check the tag on the existing blue or orange padlock. And if you are confident that it is safe to remove the padlock, you should do so. You should also take the relevant permit from the Equipment Not Available section of the Live Permit Board and sign it off to indicate that the equipment is now available for use again. De-isolation of equipment should be done when there are no padlocks remaining on the lock-off boxes and all permits are signed off and no longer on the Live Permit Board. However, before de-isolating equipment, be sure the equipment is in the correct state first. For example, in the case of confined spaces, it may be necessary to check that it is clear of materials and that the drain valves are closed and the hatches secured. Caledonian's permit to work and isolation procedure can be found in the Quality First system. You should be familiar with this procedure and keep up to date with any new or modified safety instructions. If there is anything you do not understand or you need clarification on, you should speak to your supervisor in the first instance. Please now complete the assessment that follows.